Okay, well, welcome everyone to this afternoon webinar on the rights retention strategy and what it means for EU13 and associated countries. This webinar will go for about an hour from 1 till 2. And yeah, we have quite a full program, so we won't dally. I just want to start with two pieces of housekeeping. The first thing is to say that this webinar will be recorded. Most of the interaction from attendees is via chat, so I guess you're not being seen or anything anyway, but it's just so that you know this is being recorded. The second thing is, yeah, how can you interact today? Well, as attendees, please just type into the chat any questions you might have, and I'll collect those as we go and make sure they get directed to the appropriate people. And yeah, I think that's probably the simplest and the smoothest way of facilitating the question and answer session at the latter half of this webinar. So then, without further ado, I want to pass the word over to Gemma Medinos, who is the chair of the Young Academy of Europe, who has been organizing this webinar, and she will say a few words about the webinar itself and before passing it on to Johan, and we'll progress further. So Gemma, please take the word.
Great, so thank you, Scott. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar on coalition as the right retention strategy and what it means for EU13 and associated countries. It's a pleasure to have been contacted by the Coalition S representatives to partner up to disseminate their new right retention strategy. So today we have Johan Rorik and Sally Ramsey with us, who will lead the webinar with the presentation. The Young Academy of Europe is delighted to have partnered up with national young academies or young scholar contacts that we had from the following EU13 and associated countries for this webinar: Estonia, Croatia, Latvia, Poland, Romania, Hungary, Albania, Israel, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Norway, Serbia, Turkey, and Belarus. So thank you all for agreeing to join up for this. The reason we wanted to join up was because we believe that Plan S and initiatives such as the Right Retention Strategy have a transnational ambition, but there have been some concerns as to how the information and the implications really can have a transnational reach. So for these reasons, we wanted to ensure a focus on young scholars in countries in which the funding ecosystem might not be as straightforward as for those in which there are more organizations endorsing Plan S. As Scott said, the structure of the webinar will be as follows. We will have a 20-25 minute presentation by Johan and Sally, and this will be then followed by a Q&A in which you can submit questions live here, and you can do this by the chat box. And we also have a number of questions that were submitted beforehand by the ENYAs that we've partnered up with. So I'll try and make sure that we get those answered as well. So thank you again for joining, and without further ado then, Johan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gemma, for a nice introduction. Let me share my screen with you. See how that goes. There we go. I think you should be able to see that. Always checking. Yes, so today I will be talking about the rights retention strategy and about the principle. One of the principle of the rights retention strategy is actually quite simple, namely the peer-reviewed author accepted manuscript, the AAM, is the intellectual creation of the authors and belongs to them. That's, I think, the principle that this is based on. And that means that for us, that delivering publication services does not entitle publishers to ownership of the AAM. The ownership of the AAM should be the intellectual property of the author. Publication services obviously should be paid for, and Coalition S funders are willing to do that. But we don't pay the publishers with the ownership of the AAM as we used to. We really need to change that mentality completely. And we believe that funders, more generally, not just Coalition S funders, but also universities worldwide, should ensure that their researchers are not deprived of this essential ownership right, because that is a valuable asset, both for individuals who want to reuse their work and who want to disseminate it as they see fit. And as for universities, where articles constitute a body of knowledge, that they should be proud of. So what are the key objectives of the rights retention strategy from the point of view of Coalition S? Well, we want all our research to be funded open access, without embargo, and with a CC BY license. Coalition S funders want their researchers to be able to continue to seek publication in as wide a variety of journals as possible, so not just in gold away open access journals or journals that are under a transformative agreement, but really truly in all classical subscription journals as well. So journals that do not have a transformative agreement and do not have an open access option. And to encourage, we want to encourage by this rights retention strategy, which is pushing the publishers also to consider developing alternative open access options, such as transformative agreements, which are read and publish deals, giving access to authors and readers to open access options in a journal, and what we call transformative journals. And then finally, of course, what we want is really to empower all researchers working on those, not only those working under Coalition S mandate, but truly all researchers, also those who do not have funding, to retain sufficient rights to the peer-reviewed version of their own work, the author-accepted manuscript, because the rights retention strategy is not restricted to Coalition S authors. It is true that it is mandated for Coalition S authors, but all authors, also those who do not have a funding from Coalition S, can avail themselves of the rights retention strategy as they see fit. This is something that I'd like to stress at this point. What is in rights retention for authors? Well, there's ownership. Right, authors should not give away to publishers what they rightfully own, and you can reuse and share it as you see fit without restrictions imposed by the publishers. Restrictions, by the way, that are different from one publisher to the next, and very often not even librarians whose job this is know which author, which publisher applies which restrictions to which subset of journals. The advantage of the rights retention strategy is that it is extremely simple. The publisher, of course, can own the version of record. We have no problem with that. We believe that publishers provide peer review, but peer review is carried out for free, and it is part of the scholarly discourse. And it is paid for. It is either paid for by subscription journals, by the subscription of the subscription journals, or by the APC in gold APC journals. So there is no problem with paying for publishing services, but we want ownership of the AAM. There's another thing that is in open access publishing, or in open access publishing generally, or in depositing your version in a repository as soon as you publish the journal, and that is visibility. Visibility of your research. It's been shown that in this work by Pio and her colleagues, that 31% of all journal articles are available in OA in 2019, but 52% of article views are already to open access articles. And they estimate that by 2025, 44% of all articles will be available OA, but 70% of article views will be open access articles. So that means that if 2 or 3 years from now, you are still publishing behind the paywall, your research will not be viewed. It will not be seen. You might as well be publishing on the dark web. There is really no point not to publish in open access. We also know from other research that is available in open access is cited much more quickly than other research. So really, you have no excuse not to publish in open access. Open access strategy, the rights retention strategy, also provides clarity, as I said. It cuts through all sorts of complexity across publishers. It's simple and elegant, has been called by Stephen Eaglen. And some legacy publishers are now in the process of adding confusion for authors. They accuse Coalition S of being confusing, whereas in fact they themselves are being confusing. So we want to be crystal clear about this. We believe that authors should retain their rights, own their AAM, that we want to pay to make sure that the publication services are properly paid for. That is not the issue, but payment should not include ownership and control of the content of an author's work. That is absolutely not necessary. That is very antiquated in our point of view, from our point of view. So what is, in fact, why do we do this? Why does Coalition S do this? You know, if there's enough open access options there, why do we want to do this? Well, the problem is, of course, the following, namely, we as Coalition S funders want the minimum requirement to be that the author accepted manuscript finds itself in a repository with zero embargo and a CC BY license applied by the author. Okay, all nice and well. This will now be made an obligation to Coalition S organization grant agreements. Also good, right? I mean, it's a part of your contract with the funder. But we also know that researchers will sign a publishing agreement that gives away their rights to deposit the AEM in a repository with zero embargo with a CC BY license. So when you sign that piece of paper, or when you click on a link in the publishers, on the publisher's website, and you sign by clicking there the copyright transfer agreement, transferring your copyright away from you as an author to the publisher, then in fact you are giving your rights away. And this, of course, creates a contradiction between the researcher's grant agreement, where you have committed yourself to publishing in open access and to making that article available, and the publishing agreement of the publisher that says you cannot share your own work with anyone else. So that's a contradiction. And the rights retention strategy resolves this contradiction, because the CC BY license that you apply as an author takes legal precedence over any later copyright transfer agreement. And that is because the CC BY is a license that is inherent in the article that it is attached to and cannot be removed by any later copyright transfer agreement. That is very important to know. So this is something that is completely funder independent. Any researcher can do it. Any researcher can say in a footnote, I apply a CC BY license to the AEM arising from this submission, and that gives you, if the publisher doesn't react to that, that gives you rights upon publication to disseminate that article in a repository upon publication. So how do we do this? Well, we do this through various means. This is perhaps a detail, but it is important to say something about it. We require, in fact, sufficient intellectual property rights and retention, property rights retention to comply with the open access obligations in two ways, either by what is called, and this is a little bit technical, but I think I should say something about it, especially for those people with EC grants. We operate by prior license, and that is a way in which, in fact, if you sign the agreement with your funder, that grant already claims CC BY on all of the publications that will come out of the grant. So it is a funder, properly funder requirement. And then there is also the prior obligation, which is applied, for instance, by the European Commission grants, the ERC grants, and that requires beneficiaries to do this. So it's an obligation on the beneficiary to make sure that the CC BY license is applied to the AEM or the VOR of an article. So these two approaches are slightly different. I can come back to that later if you want, but the effect is the same. You, as an author, are obliged to say something about the CC BY when you submit to a subscription journal or a hybrid open access journal. We have a preference for the version of record, obviously. We express a preference for the VOR if the prices are fair and reasonable. So we make contribution to transformative agreements, to transformative journals, etc. We are willing to pay for the version of record. That is not the issue. For us, the rights retention strategy is clearly a fallback position. It is what we want you to apply if there is no Coalition S or Plan S aligned way of making the article or the version of record open access available. So it's basically our fallback position. Yes. So how do we do this? We do this by updating the grant conditions, of course. Grant conditions now specify, and this will be rolled out over the different funders in the course of this year. Grant conditions specify that the authors must apply this public copyright license to all their future author accepted manuscripts and then deposit these in a repository. We have informed publishers about this, 95% of publishers that publish Coalition as output. And we have said that we will incorporate those responses in the journal checker tool. And until now, and until now, no publisher has told us explicitly, we will not allow articles that come accompanied by the rights retention strategy language. Their official position has been reject those articles. Later, more about that later. Sally is going to tell you about that. Now, coalition as grant holders therefore must include the details of the public license in their submissions, just in the acknowledgements footnote or in the first footnote or in the letter, the letter submitting the paper to a journal. And then once the paper has been accepted for publication, a copy of the author accepted manuscript must be deposited in a repository. So those are the two things that an author needs to do. So inform the publisher, as I said, and then include this language. A CC BY or equivalent license is applied to the AEM or the VOI arising from the submission in accordance with the grant's open access conditions. So yes, so sorry, that's the same slide. I should have taken it out. So how does an author know this? How does an author know which journal is subject to the rights retention strategy, or which journal is a gold open access journal or is under a transformative agreement and so on? We think that coalition S grant holders should easily be able to identify how their journal of choice meets their funder aligned or open access policy, and therefore we developed a journal checker tool. And the idea of a journal checker tool, you give in 3 pieces of information: your journal name, the funder name, and the institution, and that gives you a result. The result that will give you, it will tell you, well, this is a gold open access journal, you can pay a fee, or this journal is under a transformative agreement, the fee has been paid for you by your consortium, or this is a transformative journal, your funder will make a contribution or not. Or, sorry, there are no coalition S-aligned options, you will have to apply the rights retention strategy. So those are the options that the journal checker tool will tell you about, and the journal checker tool has been available since November 2020, and it works quite well, given the fact that it's been worked out in such a short period of time. I think it is a marvel that it works so well. So please go and check it out at your earliest convenience. So this is a way of finding out what you need to do with the journal, with your journal of choice. I think I will hand over here to Sally, who can tell us about the resources, the other resources that we have.
Thank you, Johan. We know that it's all can be quite daunting for researchers, and it's often librarians and other members of staff who are trying to explain this to researchers. So we've created a number of resources which are freely available on the Coalition S website. There's an infographic, a handout, and a couple of slide decks that anybody can use. So please do take a look at those. Thank you, Johan. Now then, from a legal perspective, how does this strategy work? The main thing is this idea of the priority of the CC BY license. It's the fact that the article is submitted to the publisher already with the CC BY license applied to a future accepted manuscript. So it goes in with that already there. It then cannot be removed. The copyright holder has put that on there and it can't be removed by anybody else. So this means that anybody can use this sort of mechanism is there for anybody to use. And the point is that it goes in with that CC BY license, and any accepted manuscript coming out of the submission has that CC BY license already applied to it. Thank you, Johan. So there may be instances, we don't reckon there'll be many, but there may be instances where there's a bit of a disagreement with the publisher. Something's been put in a repository perhaps and the publisher doesn't think so, or there may have been a mistake or something. So if that does happen, then Coalition S funders are encouraged to contact their funders, who will pick that up and take a look and see what's happened and see if the complaint can be upheld. Your librarians, as a librarian, your librarians can be very helpful in these sort of situations as well. So do always speak to your librarian if you're a researcher anyway about anything like this. So we wanted to add also that although we're talking to you, the young academies, cOAlition S is also talking to university associations. This idea that the rights not being given away, we feel is such an important one that we would like institutions just to have a think about that, how they might impose something like that on their, well, not impose, that's the wrong way of putting it, how they might encourage researchers within their institution to think about retaining their own rights, because we feel it's so important. Thank you, Johan. So there's this confusion seems to be being bandied around. Now, as you've seen, the rights retention strategy is quite simple. It's a few words on a submission. That's all you have to do, and then deposit in a repository. We've summed up what authors have to do in 2 points. Use the wording, stick it in a repository. That's fairly simple. However, there are some publishers who are putting ideas around which are not necessarily easy to understand and causing some confusion. First of all, you can't use the statement when submitting to the journal. Well, you can, you should. The only option there is for the journal to refuse your paper. They are quite at liberty to do that. Then the journal does not allow accepted manuscripts to be made open access under the rights retention strategy. Well, it should take precedence over any restrictions formulated by the publisher. So basically it comes down again. Yes, if it's there, it means the item should be rejected by the publisher if they're not going to allow it. And then if you use it, you'll be asked to sign a contract pledging you'll respect the embargo by the publisher. Well, in that case, submit elsewhere. In that case, you're this sort of second contractual agreement is subverting the rights retention strategy, which you are bound to by your funder. You already have an agreement with your funder. You have said you would do this. So it would put you in breach of your grant agreement. So please don't, please submit elsewhere. And this is another thing that we have seen. Choosing the green route, that's the repository route, means that your work is under an embargo that's not compatible with your funder's policy. So we should stress this. The CC BY license is applied at submission. It goes in first and it takes precedence over any publisher embargo. And then this is one which we think is rather unfair, that we have seen you must pay an APC, an article processing charge, to be compliant with your funder, even if the funder will not reimburse it. So in an instance where your cOAlition S funder, who won't fund open access in a hybrid journal with no special transformative agreement, this is where a publisher is saying, well, that's what you've got to do. You're going to have to find the money from somewhere. Well, that doesn't seem right to us. You shouldn't have to find the money from somewhere. That's why we've got the rights retention strategy. So in the small number of cases where there isn't a fully open access arrangement, then there is another route to immediate open access. So we know that the funder will pay fair and transparent costs wherever there's a cOAlition S compliant route. We cannot stress that enough. They will pay where it's fair and transparent. If that's not the case, then the rights retention strategy suffices. So this is a similar sort of idea, that you must click here to agree to paying an APC for publication, because that's the only way that you can be compliant with your funder. And we know that your funder won't pay this particular one. Again, you don't feel that you have to pay, submit elsewhere. You're being tricked into a contractual agreement, and that is subverting the rights retention strategy, which you've already got in your contract with your funder. And then using the rights retention strategy will undermine academic publishers and their transition to open access. Well, many of you may be aware of the physics paper that have been made available in the archive preprint repository, which includes accepted manuscripts, and corresponding physics journals are still going strong. The value of the physics journals for citation and pointing people to are very strong, and they're still going strong despite all the papers in archive. So it seems odd that this would change with any other subject. We also know the Royal Society will permit this sort of publishing already. And finally, repositories where you deposit the accepted manuscripts are not up to the task. Oh yes, they are. As simple as that. Repositories are largely compliant with Plan S. And I suggest, if you haven't already looked at your repository in your institution, please do go along and have a look and ask your librarians about it. So the publisher permissions, if you could just put down the permissions, Johan, all of them, the complexity of the permissions that are being asked of authors is just phenomenal. Embargoes differ between journals. There are conflicts between the publisher's policy and the funder's policy, as we've already stated. Then there's time spent checking these different policies and releasing embargoes by different publishers. I know I've done this in an institution, and it is a phenomenally complicated workflow. Then you may have seen that some publishers allow different restrictions. I'm sorry about my phone, keeps going off. Additional restrictions on dissemination, that some say it's okay to put it on your personal website, but not in an institutional repository. Why? They're both on the internet. Free repositories are okay, but not commercial ones. So you can use it in this one, but not that one. And that you can disseminate your work immediately with just a small group of people who are named, but not beyond that. Now, this seems crazy to us when you're trying to disseminate your work. Why do it here, but not there? You're supposed to check up on this as well. So you've got a lot of checking to do if you're going to be compliant with this. And additionally, your accepted manuscript is locked up for months. This doesn't seem right. The simplicity of the rights retention strategy is always use that claim, use the wording, and then your accepted manuscript is yours to reuse and share as you please. And the version of record will be there as well. So this is a sort of rather frivolous way of painting this picture. If you pay a decorator to decorate your house, they come along and they do a jolly good job, and you ask them to strip the wallpaper and sand the woodwork and so on. And you pay for those services. Then that's right, you should pay the decorator. He needs to feed his children. But you don't ask the decorator to own the house after you've paid for his services. You don't hand over the keys to your house to your very nice decorator who's done a good job and you've paid him handsomely for it. So this is what we're trying to build a comparison to here. Thank you, Johan. So what we're saying is publishers should not obtain ownership of authors' assets in exchange for delivering publication services. The publication services will be paid for. Funders will pay fair and transparent fees for open access publishing. They will be paid, but the ownership of the accepted manuscripts, authors exercise your rights by retaining your rights. Use it, don't lose it. And finally, there are some links there to further information. And that's it from Johan and me for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That was really, really informative. I was wondering if, for the audience that we have today, the people that are listening and might be sitting in countries in which there's fewer coalition S funders, and so it's a bit less straightforward. Can you summarize it for them? What does the right retention strategy mean for them? What is the advantage? I think you're on mute, yes.
Yes, I think what is important to recognize here first and foremost is that we've developed this for cOAlition as funded authors, right? But especially the rights retention strategy is a strategy that can be used by any individual author. It's really something that you can take on as your personal responsibility. And as always with personal responsibilities that you take on, it also means that you take on a little bit of hassle or potential trouble with the publisher, right? I mean, we don't think that the publisher will start suing or harassing researchers over this, because after all, it looks very bad, right? I mean, basically the author is asking rights to their own work, and the publisher will be saying, no, you have no right to keep your own work. So we expect very little trouble, but in case there is trouble, we suggest that you contact us. Even if you're not a Coalition S funder, we are still interested in seeing how authors are treated by publishers when they apply this language. In my community, for instance, linguistics community, I have started to disseminate this idea. People are very surprised to know that this is a possibility that exists. But basically what you are exploiting as an author is you are exploiting copyright. I mean, as the creator, as the author of any article, you are originally the one who owns the rights to that work, right? So if you say, I want that work in future to be used in the following way, namely under CC BY rules, then that is an inherent, that right is inherently, that license is inherently attached to that paper, which means that you keep control over it. If you give that control away, copyright transfer agreement, well, then there's nothing you can do, right? I mean, you have to ask permission to the, I mean, imagine you have to ask the crazy situation that we are in today. I mean, you create with Adobe or with any software, you create these very nice graphs, very nice articles, but especially graphs and artwork, right? You create it, then you sign the copyright transfer agreement. The moment that you want to reuse those graphs that you made yourself, you have to ask for permission of the publisher. I mean, does that strike you as right, or even, you know, sane? I think it's completely insane. You make these things, you know, you've spent hours, days making them, then you don't think you signed this copyright transfer agreement, and then suddenly later, 1-2 years later, you write another paper and you say, oh, I had made that graph there, maybe I should use it. And the publisher comes after you and says, no, you can't use that, it's mine. And of course, I mean, we've all, I think, had that kind of experience, and there is no reason why we should any longer have that experience. We should own the rights to our own AAMs. That doesn't mean that we don't respect what the publisher does afterwards. You know, putting in links and making some graphs a little bit nicer and so on and so forth. All that is fine, and we are willing to pay for those additional services. But that basic AAM that you as an author made, and that your colleagues who are also unpaid made comments on, and that those comments that you integrated into that final version, that should be yours and yours alone. So that is a very basic thing that I would like to get across. And by using those 10 words, you guarantee that, unless the publisher is going to give you trouble. But I think that trouble that the publisher might give you is worth it. Seriously.
Great, thank you. So I'll move on to the questions.
Sorry, a bit of a rant here, but
no, it was helpful. I just wanted to make sure we honed that message, that what does it mean for people who are not funded by Coalition S?
And also what I think is, and I'm going to speak from the heart here, if we all do this, not just Coalition S funded authors, but all researchers worldwide, what are the publishers going to do? They need us, right? I mean, they need us, and we are not denying them fair payment. That we're fine with paying, but what we do say is, what we do want to assert is, this work is ours, not yours. I mean, the time that we paid you in terms of with the work itself, that is over. That is really not 20th century. We live in the 21st century. Mm-hmm.
Great. So let's, if anyone from the audience has questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. In the meantime, I'll go to the ones we had submitted beforehand. So one of the questions I think is related to this a little bit is, so will Coalition S, this was prior to your talk, so it might be that now these concerns have been dissipated, but will Coalition S not only widen the already existing gaps? What do you think about the secondary effect of Plan S or Coalition S and its implementation in rich countries and institutions on the scientific performance of poor countries, rich and poor are between quotes, meaning EU13 or institutions, or simply researchers who are at a certain point of their lives without any financing?
Sally, maybe you can start, and I can.
Yes, I mean, Coalition S as a group is very aware of this situation of different countries being in different situations, very conscious of that. And we know that there are different views around the world of the ability to pay some of these really very high charges that are made by some publishers for open access. So one of the things we are aware of, that in some countries there is a preference for this repository route at the moment. I mean, South America brings to mind, and some of the African countries as well. So the rights retention strategy may help that, but I think going back to Johan's point, it's the principle of ownership of the accepted manuscript which underpins all of this. It doesn't matter if you're a rich country or a poor country. It's that sort of moral imperative, really, of that be underpinning all of this. Johan, if you want to add anything.
I could add to that, in fact, that we have to realize, of course, that this entire economy is in motion, right? I mean, these transformative agreements, these high APCs, they're all a sign of an economy that is evolving into something different. I mean, we are in a transitional period. What we are also thinking about in Coalition S, and this has not received shape yet, but is to develop a conversation with publishers and with authors and institutions worldwide, how we can move to a system that is more equitable in terms of payment. Because right now what we see, for instance, is that publishers apply policies of waivers, and these policies of waivers again are different from one publisher to the next. So for certain countries, you know, then you don't have to pay, right? I mean, but how is this applied? And so it's applied unevenly, and also we know that in some so-called poor countries there are very rich institutions who are then subject to the same waivers. So basically, also these waivers are sometimes by some authors perceived as very colonial. Oh, you're from a poor country. Oh, we're going to help you. Let me help you with a handout and the publishing fee is waived. Whereas I think we should move towards a system where everybody pays according to their means, as a function of purchasing power parity. For instance, this already exists. This is not a new idea. It's an idea that exists for medication, for instance. If you buy aspirin in Norway or you buy aspirin in New Delhi, you're not going to pay the same price. I mean, there are internationally established tiers for these prices. Why would we not be able to move to a system where you have, in the same way, as established tiers for different countries, where different countries contribute different prices to the global academic publishing, and in this way keep the system alive by contributing payment in accordance with their means? That is a system that I would like to see. I mean, obviously, we're not going to move to that system tomorrow, but if we get there 10 years from now, I would be already very happy. But so we are thinking about these issues. This is not this is something that's very much on our minds, especially in this changing environment.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. We also have a question from someone from Belarus. The previous one was from someone in Hungary. The question is, are there platforms and resources in Russian and Belarusian for open science?
I wouldn't know.
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that.
Do you have any suggestion where the person could go and try and find out?
Yes, I think the person should try to contact Irina Kuchma at EIFL. So EIFL, I'll put it in the...
Yeah, if you can put it in the chat, that'd be great.
And the person is Irina Kuchma. They are very much aware of, very much concentrated on working with countries from Eastern Europe to make transformative agreements and so on. So if anyone would know these, it's Irina, like this. Yes, Irina Kuchma from EIFL. It's not the person that I would contact for these questions. So feel free to contact her directly, and you can say that I sent you. So.
That's great. Thank you. Scott, so I see there was a question in the chat. Shall I go ahead or, yeah? So we have a question from Matic. can the RRS be applied also when publishing in transformative journal if the researcher doesn't want to use the funder funds to pay the APC?
Yes, that is a delicate question, actually. And I'll tell you why it's a delicate question. I mean, we can be open. It will be used as a way to free publishing. And this is actually how they are opposing us very often, saying, you know, what you're basically asking us is to publish for free. So what we will most likely do, what we are doing is stating a clear preference for paying the APC. That is, so if the author doesn't want to pay for the APC, they may be contacted by the publisher. They may also be contacted by their funder to find out why they don't want to pay. There may be reasons why they don't want to pay. They could say, for instance, well, you know, I mean, I don't have any funds left in my grant money. Oh, that's a valid reason to say, sorry, but I can't pay. And then maybe the funder can find some other funds to pay. I mean, I don't know. This is going to depend on a case-by-case basis. I mean, I cannot predict beforehand what is going to happen. But the most likely situation is going to be one where we say to the publishers, trust us. I mean, we want to help you get payment for the APC. But don't demand the impossible, and don't demand us to give you a blank check and that we pay for every paper that you publish, because that's not possible either. So we are right now trying to negotiate that very delicate situation. So that's why I'm giving you a very fair answer, a very open answer to the question that's being asked. Can you do it? Yes, you can try, but be aware you may be contacted by the publisher and by the funder to see if we cannot come to an agreement by which some payment is made anyway.
Great, thank you. Let me see the questions that had been posted. So the same for a person also from Belarus asked, what is the most effective promotion strategy for open science?
Sally, that's for you. You've been doing this for much longer than I have.
Strategy for open science. Well, where do I start, really? It's I think one thing which you could usefully do is look at the network of research reproducibilities, which are popping up in many countries. It's something called the UKRN, the UK Reproducibility Network, was set up in the UK, and it's being copied fantastically in other countries now. And those people, it's a lot of early career researchers actually involved with this, are doing some really inventive things, and they're putting out a lot of materials about reproducibility. And so it's not just about open access, but it is about what we would call open science, and how people can get involved, what they can do, the best routes. I would take a look at that. I can put the link in the chat in a minute when I've stopped talking. But I would take a look at that. And as we know, the open access to articles is just forming one part of that. And it's looking forward to a much broader open science horizon that we've got there. And we can see changes that researchers themselves are making here. And I think you will find a lot of really creative and well-informed people within the the reproducibility networks. I'm sure you could drop them a line. I would also suggest that you have a look at the LERU roadmap for open science. This was written a little while ago, but I think it's still valid, and it gives a sort of roadmap for institutions as to how they might move towards a more open science supported area. Plus, I think the other thing to keep your eye on is the researcher assessment and evaluation. So I give as an example DORA, which is the San Francisco Declaration there on how researchers can be assessed. There are others out there, that's not the only one, but I suggest having a look at that as well, and thinking about openness profiles and things like that. There's lots out there. I'm sure we can, if you want to contact me afterwards, I can come up with other things as well. But have a look at some of those in the first instance.
There's also EOSC Hub, So this is also something you can use, I think. EOSC. No, sorry. EOSC. European Open Science Cloud. European Open Science Cloud also has a lot of information, basic information about open science. Open science being more broader than open access, as Sally has stressed.
And I can't spell reproducibility, sorry.
Great, thank you for that, Sally. We have a new question in the chat from Ava. The question is the RRS applicable for Horizon 2020 beneficiaries as the EC is part of Coalition S? I mean, can they use the wording that it is required by the funder to retain the rights and make the AAM CCBY? Or is it applicable just for Horizon Europe beneficiaries?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, for Horizon, right? I mean, they must use the prior obligation route. So there is obligatory, there's no doubt. But I don't see why Horizon 2020 users would not be allowed to use that language in their submissions, right? They can use it, but they're not under any obligation to do so. That I think is the difference.
Very good. And then we have a clarification from Thomas, who was a previous vice chair of the Young Academy of Europe. Hi, Thomas. He says they can use, in relation to this question, they can use the statement, but they are not mandated to. And that may make it legally less strong. That's what you just said at the end, yeah.
Yes. Well, legally less strong is actually, it's difficult to know, because I mean, if you use the right retention strategy language, that is legally strong in the sense that you as an author apply this CC BY license to the document, and that's it. If you're taken to task for doing that by the publisher, the difference will be that you are not backed up by your funder, right? I mean, if you can say to the publisher, look, I have a mandate to do this, so you know, I have no choice. Go talk to my funder. It's not my problem. It's you know, talk to my funder. In case you do this on your own initiative, you do not have that backup. That is true. But what is the worst that can happen? You take away the language and you publish anyway, or you insist and you stand your ground and you contact us and we talk to the publisher. I mean, we are very much now in this phase of trying to convince publisher that the sky will not fall in when we claim rights to the AAM. We are really convinced that it's not the case. I mean, there's many indications out there, like Sally has said, archive. You know, it's worked for 20 years, signifying the end of journals. It's just we want to simplify the situation. Authors in charge.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so something you just said is related to another question we had pre-submitted. Does Coalition S model have any role in case of journals with mandatory open access fees? So is it anyhow protecting the author's right in these cases? And is it not just stabilizing the extremely high prices or fees of publications and the extra profit of the publishers?
Well, I would, yeah. It is true that we agree to pay a fee, right? I mean, but we want that fee to be fair and reasonable. So we are trying to exert downward pressure on those prices by our price transparency framework. So by 2022, by July 2022, next year, we expect publishers to give us insight into their prices, and we will make it so that these prices can be compared across publishers, at least by the relevant buyers of those services, for instance, libraries and so on. So that hopefully will exert some downward pressure on prices. I mean, we are not happy with these high prices either, believe me. I mean, but we want there to be more competition. On the one hand, on the other hand, we want there to be less emphasis on the prestige of the journals. We insist very much now, in line with Principle 10, that the prestige of journals is of no concern to us. that we will not take it into account in grant applications any longer. We will want to look at new metrics, quality-based metrics, no longer the journal impact factor. So we are living in a world that is changing in terms of evaluation and prestige. I mean, you know, 5 years from now, this will not be the same world anymore. I mean, all of us have been educated with this, oh, journal impact factor is important, the publisher prestige is important. We are trying to change that as well. And once, of course, this prestige becomes less, then the validation for those high prices also becomes less. So we are trying to work towards a new world where these high prices have no reason to be. Because right now, basically, these high prices are largely justified by the luxury aspect of prestige, right? A prestigious journal is viewed as a luxury object. And since it is a luxury object, you, as a publisher, ask for more money. I mean, this makes no sense from a commercial perspective. Yes. But it is to change that system, and we need to do it all together, right? System or not, we need to do this together. As long as you still buy into the prestige system, I mean, we cannot move as funders. We cannot move ahead either.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point in which you are linking this issue with publications and open access to the rewards and recognitions and how people, you know, because that I think is one of the things that might be feeding these fears that, of course, something like this is just gonna exacerbate inequalities.
Exactly, the rewards and incentive system is what causes this. It's really at the root of this entire problem.
Could I also chip in about the, I think Coalition S is not sort of hung up on this APC model either. They've just run a huge piece of work about diamond open access. And I think this is of particular interest to this audience, because a lot of these, this is all jargon, diamond open access. It's where you don't pay for publication. There is other funding and support available for the publication there. And I understand that there are quite a lot of these journals that don't require a payment for publication in Eastern Europe. Johan will probably know more about this than I do, but I think it's worth looking out these journals where you don't have to pay to publish open access, and think about how in your institution they may be supported, perhaps. Because they are another option, and there may be more popping up, I don't know, you know, within institutions, but certainly take a look at the Diamond Open Access work that the Coalition has done in its report, led by Operas.
Thank you, Sally. Yes, I think it's important to then, that this really needs to be linked to a changing in the system and DORA and evaluations, because, you know, being competitive is still, hopefully we're moving away from it, but it's still linked to prestige, to publishing in this prestigious journal. So how competitive is then to publish in this other one?
This also answers Monique Trom's question in the chat that I see, because she says, what are we doing for, you know, people now who are still dependent on prestige? Well, my answer to that would be, we have to change this somewhere. I mean, if we invoke simply all these poor researchers now, they have to, in terms of prestige and so on, then we will catch you forever. We have to make a clean break at some point, and funders have already made a clean break by pledging that they will long with metrics in the selection of new. Those young researchers are ready to apply for projects with the Coalition as grant holders. This new system will be in place, and they'll be judged on qualitative metrics that are very different from the ones that we know today. So it will no longer be how many papers have you published, but more like, okay, give me the 10 best papers that you produced in your career, and tell me why. Tell me why these are the best papers, and that will be evaluated by a panel of experts, whether they like your narrative, right, and whether that narrative holds up with respect to other narratives, and that is whether other people agree with that narrative. That's the kind of world that we are moving towards. Not a world in which you apply a salami tactic to your papers, where you have 10 papers that are almost identical. Just you have, right? It's no longer.
You were cutting a little bit there for me. Maybe it was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah, so for those who didn't see it in the chat where we have this on YouTube, Monique asked that it's nice, and hopefully we'll get there, and links to DORA and recognition and rewarding are definitely the way forward. But how about young researchers now who need to advance their career now? So she says, I'm not so worried about many of my chemistry colleagues, especially regarding high APC costs or publishers refusing submission by coalition as authors. And she knows many researchers worried about it. And then choosing a different journal might be ethically preferred, but it's not always preferred from an internationally competitive point of view. So I'm conscious about the time.
Yes, but as I said, I think funders are changing their application policies in such a way that these quantitative and based metrics will no longer be applicable by the time these people apply for grants. So that's in short my answer. I also see that Scott has a question: where should we write the rights retention strategy sentence? You write it in the acknowledgements, or you write it in the submission letter. Either, preferably even both. But the acknowledgement section should be enough.
I think while we're on to everybody else, I don't know if you have seen Stephen Eaglin's primer on the rights retention strategy. It's probably worth just flagging that up. He's written that for researchers by researchers.
Do you have a link, Sally? Do you have a...
I can try and find, I'm not on my normal computer here, so I can try and find it.
Let me see. I'm not sure if it's online yet, but we can.
It's on Zenodo. I'll try and find it, and I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, there's also a comment from Monique in the chat that it would be good to have more countries and funding agencies across the world to get on board. So how's cOAlition S growing in terms of organizations endorsing?
Well, we are growing slowly because of the pandemic, of course. It's much more difficult to sit across from someone and try to convince them that they should do this. But we are slowly growing. I mean, Portugal, for instance, recently became a member. So now we are 26 organizations, and there will be another member joining us soon from North America. I cannot say you which one yet.
Mm-hmm. And we also have a question about whether there's some example where RRS was used and it's in the acknowledgements. It would be great to use it as an example.
Yes, we have plenty of examples actually, but I think
on the website maybe
this did I cut out this time around, but we do have examples of the RRS being used. And
are they can people find them on the cOAlition S website maybe, or should they contact you?
I don't think we've put them
on the site.
Yeah, I don't think we've put them up on the site yet, but that's something that we could do, perhaps, Johan, isn't it? To give some
sure. Let's do that.
Let's take that away with us. Yeah.
Yes, we'll take that away as homework.
Okay, great. Well, I'm conscious of the time. We have a minute left. Is there any final short sentence that either of you would like to say to sum up the webinar and to the audience that we've had today?
I think my view is just that the times they are changing, and I think we need to grasp this nettle and just move on. I don't think we need to wallow in the way things have been always up till now. I think we need to move forward and make things more open.
Yes, I believe we have a unique opportunity here. I mean, this is the first time, after all, that funders have come together to push this forward. They've really said, we've had enough. This has to change. Not to get behind that message, right? And to say, look, we are providing a systemic approach to moving towards open access. It's not just gold or diamond, or it's all kinds of open access. We have policies for all kinds of open access. We want to move to a more equitable world. Why not do it? What's not to like? You know, join the battle.
And cOAlition S can't change everything on its own all at once.
No, we need you. We need you. I mean, it's very simple. If you guys are not convinced of this, especially as young researchers, then we can, you know, we can sing until kingdom come, nothing will change. You guys have to do it. You have to change. You have to tell your, you know, even your older professors and your supervisor, you live in an old world. We are moving towards a new world. This is the message. You know, your prestigious journals, the journals that you grew up with, we no longer recognize. We no longer don't want to be evaluated with a journal impact factor. That's nonsense.
Yeah,
and so on and so forth. We really need to engage.
We're also doing a lot of work on the rewards and recognition.
I'm sure you are. Yes. Yes.
So thank you very much. This was extremely helpful and hopefully clarified questions and concerns and felt as empowering as it was presented. And
do not hesitate to contact us if you have any questions or if you experience any problems. Also, to all the different young academies in these various countries, do invite us if you see it fit. If you see an occasion to invite us, we will be happy to come and talk in the same way we did today for a more specific audience, because there's lots of questions about this. We realize that.
That would be good. It would be a good idea to follow this up with talks like this at the national level.
Yeah. We are there. You can just tell us where and when. It's easy now with the screens.
Okay, so thank you very much everyone for attending and for the interactions. We will make the recording available shortly on YouTube and we will communicate this to all of you. Thanks again to Johan and Sally for your cooperation and of course Scott for helping with the organization. I hope you all have a very nice day. Bye.